You can use Azure DevOps to deploy and refresh your Coalesce data pipelines. For the sake of this video, we will assume that you have already installed the Coalesce CLI or COA to your local machine. If you have not already done this, you can view the Coalesce documentation on how to install the CLI. Within Azure DevOps, navigate to Pipelines within the Pipelines menu item. If you don't have any pre-existing pipelines, select Create Pipeline. This option will also be available in the upper right-hand corner if you have existing pipelines within your Azure DevOps account. Next, you will need to select the Git provider of your Coalesce project. For this video, I'll be using GitHub. Then, select the Git repository of the Coalesce project you wish to deploy. After selecting the Git repository, you will have the option to configure this pipeline in multiple ways. For this video, we'll be creating a starter pipeline, so we'll select that option. Azure DevOps will have some boilerplate YAML in this template. You can delete this code. From the Coalesce documentation on Azure DevOps, you can see multiple code examples available. We will copy the code for deploying a pipeline and paste it into our pipeline within Azure DevOps. You will notice that the pipeline is using a pool called default. We will configure this a little later. Additionally, you will see that there is a secure file needed to run the pipeline. We will add this momentarily. With our code available in the pipeline, we can select Save and commit our code using the commit message generated for us, or a commit message that you choose. With our pipeline created, we need to give the pipeline access to the configuration file of our Coalesce environment. To do this, navigate to the Library section of the pipeline menu within Azure DevOps. Within Library, navigate to Secure Files. You can select the +Secure File button to upload a file. If you have the Coalesce CLI installed on your local machine, navigate to the .coa directory and open it. Within the directory is your config file. If you have never configured this file before, you will need to do so before uploading the file to Azure DevOps. Before uploading, make sure that the environment ID is the same as the environment ID you wish to deploy and refresh within Coalesce. Once your config file is ready to go, you can drag and drop it into the Azure DevOps interface. The file name will upload as config. You do not need to change this name, as the YAML we copied for our pipeline from the Coalesce documentation is looking for the file named config. We can click on the file and select Pipeline Permissions. Select the plus button in the upper right-hand corner and select the pipeline you wish to give access to this file. We'll select the pipeline we just created. Now that our config file is ready to go, we need to configure an agent to run our pipeline. If you already have an Azure DevOps agent, make sure your pool in your pipeline YAML is pointed to the proper agent pool. If you do not have an agent, you will need to set one up. For the sake of this video, I will set up a new self-hosted agent. To configure an agent, navigate to the project settings in Azure DevOps. Within the project settings, select Agent Pools. If you remember from our pipeline YAML, our current pool is default. We'll continue to use that pool for this video. Select the default agent pool and navigate to Agents. To add a new agent, select the New Agent button and follow the instructions for setting up an agent. Once you have an agent available within your agent pool, you can navigate back to Pipelines and prepare to run our pipeline for the first time. I'll select the pipeline and select Run Pipeline. Azure DevOps will display some additional parameters and the branch we will be deploying. I'll leave this as it is and select Run. Azure DevOps will kick off the job by first checking the queue and any resource restrictions. In this case, the pipeline needs access to the agent we just created. We can grant that access directly from the pipeline. Azure DevOps begins to run the job once the queue and any resource restrictions are resolved. This includes downloading the configuration file we gave the pipeline access to, checking out our code from our repository, and running the deploy command from the CLI. With the deploy command executed, we can navigate to Coalesce and see that a deploy operation has been kicked off. You have now successfully deployed a Coalesce pipeline within Azure DevOps. We can follow a similar workflow to set up an Azure DevOps pipeline that refreshes our Coalesce project. We'll use the same config file and agent that were set up earlier, so the only configuration necessary is to create the pipeline. We can create a new pipeline, select the Git provider, determine the repository we wish to use, and again, select Starter Pipeline. We can copy the code from the Coalesce documentation covering pipeline refreshes into our pipeline. You can configure this code as needed for your use case, But for this video, we will have the pipeline configured as a cron schedule to update every hour. We can save and run this pipeline using the commit message that Azure DevOps has created for us. We can see that the job has been queued, and by clicking into the job, we can see that we need to grant permissions to our config file and agent. With access to these resources, the pipeline will begin executing the refresh job. We can navigate back to Coalesce and see that a refresh job has been kicked off and our nodes are refreshing. Azure DevOps allows you to be very sophisticated with how you integrate and deploy pipelines, and you can use the framework from this video to incorporate any of your Coalesce jobs into a broader CI/CD process. For questions or help, you can file a support request at help.coalesce.io.